The morning started just like any other. The sun's rays slicing through my curtains, the distant hum of lawnmowers, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of freshly watered lawns. Little did I know that routine Wednesday would unleash a chain of events that would shake my neighborhood and ignite a fierce debate about accessibility and human decency. When I drove up to the Westwood Pines Community Center, a place I volunteered at almost daily, I noticed something terribly wrong. The mobility ramps, which had been bolted to each of the center's 3 entrances for barely 6 months, were missing, not vandalized or broken, gone entirely, as though they'd never existed. My heart thundered in my chest. We'd invested significant funds, time, and community goodwill to install those ramps. They were lifelines for seniors with walkers and wheelchairs. Stepping out of my car, I almost dropped my tote bag of volunteer supplies. Mr. Daniel, the center's elderly caretaker and my good friend, stood on the sidewalk, hands gripping his baseball cap anxiously. At 68, he was still spry, but I could see the worry lines etched across his forehead. "Where on earth did the ramps go?" he murmured, almost to himself. I jogged up to the building, my sneakers squeaking on the moist pavement. Sure enough, the bolts that had once secured the ramps were yanked out, leaving behind gaping holes. The walkway was deserted except for Mr. Daniel and me. "This has to be a mistake," I said, my voice tight. "Maybe a contractor took them for repairs without telling us." But we both knew better. The previous afternoon, the ramps were there, solid and intact. The center had closed around 8 p.m. No overnight maintenance was scheduled. Someone must have removed them under the cover of darkness. As if reading my mind, Mr. Daniel sighed. "This is going to make a lot of people furious, especially folks like Mrs. Lansing and Mr. Lee. They rely on those ramps. If this is some kind of sick prank, it's gone too far." I whipped out my phone, snapping pictures of the now bare entrances. "We'll figure this out," I vowed. Yet deep inside, I felt an uneasy flutter. I suspected the real culprit was no random prankster but Ms. Gloria, the HOA Karen of Westwood Pines, infamous for her unwavering commitment to property values. She'd complained bitterly about the ramps ever since they were unveiled, calling them metal monstrosities. Could she really have orchestrated this theft? The thought sent an angry chill down my spine. We'd find out soon enough. Within hours, the center buzzed with alarm and confusion. Seniors arriving for morning activities were forced to climb the now exposed steps, many wincing at each ledge. Cheryl, another volunteer, hurried outside with a makeshift wooden board to create a precarious slope. It was better than nothing, but my gut twisted each time an older resident tried to balance on that flimsy plank. News of the missing ramps spread quickly. While some believed it was an isolated act of vandalism, many whispered the name Ms. Gloria, recalling her repeated rants about how the ramps ruined the community's aesthetic. She was infamous for patrolling the neighborhood in her gray SUV, scouring for minor HOA infractions, mailbox dents, mismatched shutters, or even lawn decorations placed too close to the sidewalk. Removing something as essential as mobility ramps took her meddling to an entirely new level. By midday, we'd canceled several programs that relied on disabled participants being able to safely enter the center. I watched in dismay as Mr. Lee, who used a wheelchair, was turned away at the door for the first time in months. His crestfallen expression stung more than any personal slight Ms. Gloria had ever aimed at me. This was about the dignity and independence of our seniors, people who deserved far better treatment. Around noon, Officer Maldonado from the local police department arrived to take a look. He'd been summoned by one of the seniors who insisted on filing a theft report. He walked through the building, snapping pictures, his brow furrowing deeper with every question we answered. "I'll be honest," he said, pocketing his notebook. "This is serious. If these ramps were installed in compliance with ADA standards, removing them without authorization could be a violation of federal guidelines, not just petty theft." That possibility both comforted and alarmed me. Comforted because it meant we had some legal recourse. Alarmed because Ms. Gloria and the HOA board members loyal to her were known for wriggling out of accountability by hiding behind legal technicalities. So far, no one had stepped forward as a witness, but acts like this rarely happened without someone noticing. Perhaps we'd find a clue in a neighbor's security footage. As the day wore on, each senior who struggled up the steps reignited my anger. Whoever had done this cared nothing for those who genuinely needed accommodations. We had to stop them and ensure the ramps returned, for good. To the uninitiated, Westwood Pines looked like a postcard. Rows of tidy houses, pastel shutters, white picket fences, and symmetrical rose gardens. But beneath the veneer of perfection lay an HOA with a long history of intolerance for deviations from its standards. I'd moved here a few years ago, enchanted by the scenic walking trails and friendly chatter at the community center. Over time, however, I noticed how certain residents, especially Ms. Gloria, treated the HOA covenants like unassailable law. Ms. Gloria had ascended to an influential board position by undermining more moderate members. She was sharp, charismatic in a ruthless sort of way, and possessed a voice that could hold an entire room hostage. Once, she'd successfully campaigned to ban front-yard vegetable gardens, claiming they clashed with the neighborhood's upscale feel. Another time, she'd tried to force a neighbor to remove a wheelchair ramp from their private home. Intimidated by potential fines, that neighbor eventually sold the house instead. Yet removing the community center's ramps was a brazen step beyond anything she'd done before. It didn't affect a single household. It affected dozens of seniors who came from across the area. If Ms. Gloria believed she could get away with it scot-free, she clearly underestimated our collective outrage. That evening, I joined Cheryl and Mr. Daniel for a hurried meeting in the center's administrative office. Our conversation was tense but determined. Should we confront Ms. Gloria directly? Cheryl asked, flipping through her phone's contact list for HOA board members. Or do we wait until we have more evidence? Mr. Daniel clenched his jaw. Evidence might be wise. We don't want a he said, she said situation. I agreed, though my blood still boiled at the thought of Ms. Gloria sipping tea in her meticulously pruned backyard, gloating about her victory. Let's see if any neighbors have camera footage. And I'll ask around if anyone noticed suspicious activity. We decided to gather information quietly. If Ms. Gloria was behind this, she'd likely cover her tracks. Meanwhile, our seniors suffered each day those ramps stayed missing. A part of me feared Ms. Gloria was counting on that suffering to break our resolve. The next morning, a surprising group arrived at the center. The local high school shop teacher, Mr. Green, and 3 of his students. They were the same teens who had helped install the original ramps months earlier, as part of a community service project. Their leader, a lanky sophomore named Diego, approached me, eyes brimming with indignation. We heard about what happened, he said. We want to help. Touched by their initiative, I led them outside, showing the spots where the ramps used to be. They scowled at the sight of the stripped bolts. Mr. Green shook his head. This is unacceptable. The kids worked so hard, and those ramps made a real difference. They offered to build temporary wooden ramps in the school workshop. Although less durable than the original metal ones, these makeshift ramps would at least be safer than a single narrow plank. Mr. Daniel beamed at the idea. That would be wonderful. Anything is better than this hazard. Within hours, the teenagers were measuring and jotting notes, sorting out logistics for transporting the wooden frames from their workshop to the center. Their enthusiasm was a ray of hope in an otherwise dreary situation. Despite Ms. Gloria's meddling, new seeds of community spirit were sprouting. Cheryl snapped photos of the students at work, posting them on the Nextdoor app. It quickly garnered supportive comments from neighbors expressing gratitude. Yet as I scrolled through the replies, I spotted a pocket of people praising Ms. Gloria for holding the line on aesthetics. My stomach lurched, realizing she still had allies who shared her priorities. This war for public opinion was only beginning. That evening, I called my friend Becca, who once served on our HOA board before moving to a neighboring town. She possessed a trove of stories about Ms. Gloria's earlier escapades. Gloria's not just a stickler, she's ruthless, Becca recalled. Remember the fiasco with those yard flags? She had them outlawed because they clashed with the chosen color palette. I shuddered at the memory. Did you ever suspect she'd go this far? Removing something that helps seniors? Becca sighed. Honestly, yes. She never cared about accessibility. Everything boiled down to property values. She once told me, we can't let Westwood Pines become a magnet for the infirm. I was horrified. My stomach churned. Miss Gloria's prejudice ran deeper than I'd imagined. She likely saw the ramps as an eyesore, and the seniors themselves as undesirable. The moral ground we stood on, advocating for accessibility, directly threatened her worldview. Before hanging up, Becca added, Don't underestimate her. If cornered, she'll fight dirty. But she's gone too far this time. Public sympathy is on your side. Her words lingered in my mind. Miss Gloria prided herself on manipulation, quietly shaping HOA policies. But removing the ramps might have been an overreach that would finally topple her empire. If so, I intended to push hard until she faced real consequences. 2 days passed in a flurry of volunteer work. The high school students finished their temporary wooden ramps, less elegant than the originals, but serviceable. Each day, seniors navigated them with guarded optimism, grateful but still resentful that they had to rely on an improvised fix. Then, in a stroke of luck, I received an email from Barbara Carter, a local representative of the AARP. She'd caught wind of the situation through a mutual contact at the senior center. "I'd like to discuss possible legal remedies," she wrote. "This kind of action, removing accessibility features, raises serious red flags regarding ADA compliance." My heart soared. The AARP was a powerful ally, one known for championing the rights of older Americans. If Ms. Gloria thought she could bulldoze seniors' access without repercussions, she was about to learn otherwise. Barbara visited that same afternoon, a stack of pamphlets tucked under her arm. We gathered in the rec room, where a handful of volunteers and anxious seniors listened as she explained our options. If these ramps were indeed compliant with ADA guidelines, she said, their removal could constitute discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Depending on the center's funding public grants, for instance, there might be additional legal angles. "The AARP is prepared to back you." Ms. Lansing, leaning on her cane, looked near tears. "That's wonderful. But what if the HOA fights back?" "They usually do." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll escalate. The Department of Justice has taken an interest in such cases before, and civil suits are also possible. Public opinion often favors inclusive design." A ripple of relief passed through the room. For the first time since the ramps disappeared, I felt like we had a real shot at holding Ms. Gloria accountable. Barbara urged us to gather statements from affected seniors and compile any evidence of Ms. Gloria's hostility toward the ramps. After the meeting, Barbara pulled me aside. "You suspect an HOA board member. Do you have proof?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But we're looking." She nodded. "Keep me informed. If we link this act to Ms. Gloria, her trouble will be tenfold." Watching her drive off, I felt the first true flicker of hope. Ms. Gloria had never faced an organization as large and influential as the AARP, and she wasn't prepared for what was coming. Just as our morale soared, Ms. Gloria made her next move. One afternoon, she posted a statement on the Westwood Pines HOA website, a call for order and neighborhood standards. In it, she lamented unsightly additions appearing at the community center without proper review. She insinuated that if the ramps were removed, it was only because they had violated procedures set by the HOA to uphold property values. Reading her post made my blood boil. She never explicitly admitted to orchestrating the removal, but implied it was justified. The message ended with a caution about outside organizations interfering in our neighborhood affairs, a thinly veiled shot at the AARP. The post sparked a frenzy of debate. Many residents blasted Ms. Gloria for prioritizing aesthetics over human needs. Others praised her for protecting the community. The lines were drawn more starkly than ever. Some loyalists insisted the ramps were out of place, ignoring the moral and legal implications of restricting seniors' access. Incensed, I drafted a rebuttal, typing furiously about how the center had followed relevant guidelines and how the ramps were absolutely vital for seniors. Before hitting submit, I paused. Ms. Gloria might twist my words into a lawsuit. In the end, I posted a calm, fact-based response that cited ADA statutes. Let her spin that however she wished. That night, my phone buzzed with text messages from worried seniors and volunteers. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. I reassured them about the AARP's involvement, though in truth, I worried about Ms. Gloria's cunning. She'd survived controversies before. Could she dodge this one? A special session of the HOA board was announced just 2 days later. Ms. Gloria had clearly pushed for it, hoping to codify new guidelines that would label the center's ramps as illegitimate structures. She likely aimed to ban them altogether under the banner of protecting property values. On a sultry Friday evening, we packed the small HOA meeting hall. Seniors filled the front rows, many holding signs reading "Accessibility is a right" and "Ramps aren't optional." Ms. Gloria perched at the front table, flanked by 2 board members who seemed uneasy. The HOA president, Mr. Fowler, looked downright nervous. Ms. Gloria opened the meeting with a monologue about preserving the visual consistency of Westwood Pines. She avoided direct mention of the removed ramps, framing the discussion around oversized attachments to communal buildings. My skin crawled at her arrogance. Then Barbara Carter rose from the back of the room, introducing herself as an AARP representative. Her voice carried calm authority. "I must remind the board," she said, "that removing ADA-compliant ramps or forbidding their reinstallation could be grounds for a discrimination lawsuit." A hush fell. Ms. Gloria stiffened. "We must respect neighborhood bylaws," she countered, aiming a frosty smile at Barbara. "We can't allow large metallic objects to appear whenever individuals please." Several seniors booed. The tension soared. One board member tried to restore order, but Ms. Gloria pressed on, insisting any ramp must undergo lengthy design reviews. She even claimed seniors could use side entrances with fewer steps, a dismissive suggestion that enraged many. A wave of angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Barbara calmly stepped forward again, brandishing a folder of documents. She cited ADA regulations that prohibit imposing undue barriers on disabled individuals. Ms. Gloria tried to interject, but the audience was no longer on her side. Then a voice spoke up from the back. "Tell them what you did, Ms. Gloria." The room turned to see Wayne, a local handyman, striding forward. He held out his phone, showing text messages he claimed were from Ms. Gloria, instructing him to dispose of the ramps quietly. Gasps filled the hall. Ms. Gloria's face went crimson. For a moment, Ms. Gloria was speechless. Then she sputtered, accusing Wayne of forging the messages. But he had the receipts. He scrolled through a conversation that revealed her talking about unsightly structures and how the ramps must vanish. Date and timestamps matched the night the ramps disappeared. Chaos erupted. Seniors shouted in outrage. Board members stared at Ms. Gloria, horror dawning on their faces. Mr. Fowler tried to read the messages, but Ms. Gloria snatched Wayne's phone, fumbling in a panic, only making herself look guiltier. Barbara seized the moment. "If these messages are legitimate," she said, voice carrying over the uproar, "Ms. Gloria not only orchestrated the removal but intentionally violated the ADA. The AARP stands ready to pursue legal action." Ms. Gloria finally found her voice, but it was shaky. She denied wrongdoing, claiming the texts were taken out of context and that she only wanted to replace the ramps with something more tasteful. Her usual self-assured posture wavered, revealing desperation beneath. A few loyalists tried defending her, but the tide of public opinion had turned. In a strained voice, Mr. Fowler announced the board would recess to examine the evidence. They retreated behind closed doors for what felt like an eternity. People huddled in corners, gossiping and speculating. Barbara and I exchanged glances, neither entirely relaxed. Ms. Gloria was slippery, and we knew she'd try any maneuver to escape accountability. At last, the board returned. A visibly shaken Mr. Fowler explained they would conduct a formal investigation into Ms. Gloria's actions, pending immediate suspension of her board privileges. The hall erupted in applause. Ms. Gloria stormed out, ignoring reporters who had gathered near the entrance. I'd never seen her defeated before, yet there she was, fleeing the room. In the days following Ms. Gloria's suspension, the HOA scrambled to restore its image. They invited me, Cheryl, Mr. Daniel, and Barbara to help draft a plan for reinstating the ramps. Formal apologies were issued to seniors whose access had been restricted. The board swiftly hired contractors to fabricate new metal ramps, larger and more durable than before. The cost, bitterly for Ms. Gloria's loyalists, would come from HOA reserves. Neighbors I'd never spoken to offered help. One donated funds to improve the walkway's lighting, so seniors could feel secure at night. Another proposed hosting a community potluck to celebrate the ramp's return. The rancor Ms. Gloria unleashed was transforming into unity. People recognized how essential accessibility was, and how easily one person's prejudices could jeopardize it. Meanwhile, the AARP kept Ms. Gloria's feet to the fire. Barbara updated us on the possible legal ramifications if she tried obstructing the new ramps. There was also talk of a civil suit on behalf of seniors harmed by the abrupt removal. Ms. Gloria herself maintained a low profile, though rumors suggested she was seeking lawyers to defend her actions. Some speculated she might even sell her home and vanish. Finally, on a bright Monday morning, the new ramps arrived. Volunteers and professional workers guided them into place, drilling and bolting them securely. I can't describe the relief I felt when the first senior rolled up one, beaming. A crowd gathered, applauding as if we were unveiling a monument. In a sense, we were. These ramps symbolized not just physical access, but the triumph of compassion over small-minded hostility. In the following weeks, Westwood Pines felt transformed. A chain reaction of positivity rippled through the community. Some neighbors who'd never visited the center before stopped by, curious about the new ramps and enchanted by the surge in goodwill. Attendance soared, and local businesses donated resources for new programs. Here and there, a few holdouts still grumbled about focusing too much on seniors. But they were drowned out by the enthusiastic majority. Even the local newspaper highlighted our story. Ramps returned. A neighborhood stands up to HOA overreach. It spotlighted the AARP's involvement and credited the high school students for their quick, temporary fixes. While Ms. Gloria's name was absent from the headline, everyone knew who had tried to bury accessibility under her twisted vision of aesthetic perfection. Meanwhile, the HOA board, anxious to regain public trust, announced a review of its policies on disability access. They welcomed input from older residents and disability advocates. For once, the board wanted to do the right thing, rather than reflexively uphold rigid guidelines. It was a shift I'd never thought possible, spurred by Ms. Gloria's catastrophic miscalculation. As for Ms. Gloria, she practically vanished from Westwood Pines' public life. Occasionally, someone saw her strolling the neighborhood with a forced smile, but no one rushed to greet her. Her power had evaporated. The board had suspended her, pending a final decision likely to remove her altogether. Reflecting on the roller coaster we'd been on, the shock of the missing ramps to the euphoria of seeing them restored, I realized how easily real harm can be done when petty ideals trump human empathy. But I also saw the incredible power of unity. Teenagers, seniors, volunteers, and even outsiders like the AARP rallied around a cause that Ms. Gloria thought she could crush. She learned too late that a caring community can't be subdued. Eventually, the day came for a ribbon cutting. It wasn't as grandiose as Ms. Gloria's pompous ceremonies for other HOA upgrades, just a modest gathering under a bright, cloudless sky. Seniors in wheelchairs and with walkers lined up by the gleaming new ramps. Mr. Daniel cut a simple ribbon, prompting cheers and applause. The high school volunteers received a warm ovation. Barbara stood by, smiling with satisfaction. In my brief speech, I thanked everyone for their perseverance. These ramps are more than metal and bolts, I said, voice trembling with emotion. They're a symbol of our commitment to each other, a statement that in Westwood Pines, no one gets left behind. Applause thundered in the small courtyard. People who, months ago, barely acknowledged each other now felt united. We discovered a collective sense of responsibility, prioritizing human needs over superficial guidelines. Ms. Gloria was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she was packing up to leave Westwood Pines, the humiliation too great to bear. Whether or not she faced further legal consequences remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: she would never again wield her petty tyranny in our neighborhood. Over the next month, the center's attendance soared even higher. New groups formed to support mobility-impaired residents. The heartbreak of losing the ramps had ended up forging a deeper bond among volunteers and neighbors. It became neighborhood lore, a living reminder that we had to look out for one another. I inhaled the fresh air one afternoon, watching seniors easily traverse the ramps that had once been ripped away. A sense of pride and peace settled over me. We had succeeded against a bully who believed her obsession with property values justified anything. She learned, far too late, that when a community rises together, there's no single Karen who can strip away vital rights without facing the united will of everyone. Even after Ms. Gloria vanished from public view, the repercussions of her actions continued rippling across Westwood Pines. The HOA found itself in a precarious spot, facing a wave of resentment, especially from seniors, compelling them to hold an emergency election to replace her seat. Many believed it was the only way to restore trust. Mr. Fowler, the HOA president, looked exhausted each time I saw him. One evening, he asked to meet at the clubhouse. He wanted my advice about hosting a candidate forum in the community center, a move he admitted was unusual, but likely necessary for transparency. They want to see the candidates speak openly about supporting accessibility, he said, fiddling with his pen. If we don't accommodate them, it'll look like we're hiding something. It made sense. We arranged the forum for a Saturday afternoon, inviting all potential candidates to speak for 10 minutes and field questions from residents. When word got out, 4 neighbors declared candidacy, a remarkable number for a single HOA board seat. 2 were longtime residents frustrated by Ms. Gloria's tyranny. A middle-aged father joined the race, citing his mother's need for a wheelchair. The last candidate was Denise, a retiree known for her philanthropic work. Each emphasized one core promise: never let what happened with the ramps happen again. The forum itself crackled with energy. Seniors filled the front rows. Younger families stood near the walls. One by one, the candidates outlined a vision of a more inclusive HOA, promising to focus on real community needs rather than petty infractions. Each referenced the ramp removal as a cautionary tale. Questions from the crowd ranged from sidewalk maintenance to ensuring a more transparent board. The event ended with a standing ovation for the idea that Westwood Pines could become kinder. A small group of Ms. Gloria's supporters grumbled about overreaction, but their voices sounded weaker than ever. While the community embraced a forward momentum, a few emotional scars lingered. Some seniors, remembering the humiliation of being turned away by missing ramps, expressed ongoing anxiety. Mrs. Lansing admitted to me that she'd often pause in her car, double-checking that the ramps were still there before exiting. Mr. Lee, reliant on a wheelchair, confessed he found it hard to trust the HOA after feeling abandoned. In response, Barbara Carter organized a workshop titled Accessibility and Community Compassion. Held in the center's multipurpose room, it drew dozens of residents. Guest speakers from local disability rights groups explained how inclusive design benefits everyone: older folks, parents with strollers, even delivery workers. Neighbors who once seemed indifferent listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. One resident suggested the HOA sponsor an annual review of sidewalks to spot hazards like cracks or abrupt changes in elevation. The notion that Ms. Gloria's fiasco could lead to a broader culture of accessibility felt like a triumph. Of course, a few holdouts grumbled about too many resources going into these efforts. But the vast majority embraced the chance to ensure no fiasco like Ms. Gloria's ramp removal would ever blindside us again. By the workshop's end, volunteers had stepped forward to form a new Accessibility Advisory Committee, set to work alongside future board members. I felt a surge of gratitude. Ms. Gloria's brazen act had triggered the opposite effect of what she intended. Instead of shutting out seniors, the community had drawn them closer. As autumn leaves painted Westwood Pines in shades of gold, the special election concluded. Denise, the philanthropist retiree, won by a landslide. Her campaign mantra, "People over property values," resonated with residents fed up with the HOA's authoritarian streak. On her first day in office, she visited the center to greet seniors, reiterating her commitment to open dialogue. Under Denise's guidance, the board formally terminated Ms. Gloria's membership. The official statement cited actions contrary to community values and potential violations of federal guidelines. Many neighbors breathed a sigh of relief. The dreaded specter of Ms. Gloria was removed from power. A few days later, a moving truck was spotted outside her home. Rumors swirled that she was leaving town. No farewell party was thrown. In a final twist, the AARP, assisted by the newly formed Accessibility Committee, released a detailed report praising Westwood Pines for transforming a painful incident into a catalyst for real change. The local newspaper ran a front-page story applauding the volunteer efforts, high school students, and the fresh HOA leadership. Quoted in the piece was Mrs. Lansing. "I used to worry I'd be left behind, but neighbors showed me we're in this together." That sentiment echoed everywhere. People who rarely spoke to one another now discussed ways to expand accessible amenities. Even Mr. Fowler, once timid, seemed invigorated by the outpouring of civic engagement. On a crisp October afternoon, we held a small celebration at the center, a potluck brimming with homemade dishes and cheerful conversation. Tables displayed photos of the original ramps, the shaky wooden replacements, and the new metal ramps that now gleamed in the sunlight. The images told a story of strife and triumph, of a community forced to examine its priorities, emerging stronger for it. I lingered for a moment by the ramp where all this turmoil began, recalling the heartbreak I'd felt when it disappeared. Now, it stood sturdier than ever, shining under the autumn sun. Seniors rolled or walked up and down with ease, carrying plates of food, stopping to admire the potted chrysanthemums along its base. Each squeak of a walker, each hum of a mobility scooter, sounded like a victory fanfare. Cheryl joined me, gazing at the scene. "Can you believe how far we've come?" she asked, voice tinged with awe. I shook my head. "It's amazing. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring out the best in people." She smiled. "We owe a lot to the AARP, the high school kids, Mr. Daniel, and, ironically, to Ms. Gloria. If she hadn't gone so far, we might never have come together." A soft breeze rustled the autumn leaves. Indeed, adversity had awakened a spirit of unity. Ms. Gloria's obsession with appearances had exposed an even deeper truth: compassion and community, when tested, can become unstoppable forces. I inhaled the crisp air, feeling a profound sense of peace. Westwood Pines wasn't perfect, but it was undeniably kinder and more aware now. The older residents had found their voices, the youth discovered the power of service, and we all learned that sometimes you must stand up to bullies, even those wielding an HOA rulebook like a scepter.